But your pulse, you get such good pulse.
All right, so we're here at the Clarinet Convention. My good friend Brad Behn has been kind enough to join me here to talk about mouthpieces, reed cases, barrels, all sorts of things. We're in our happy place. We're surrounded by mouthpieces, reed cases. It's all good. Brad is mostly known, I think, tell me if I'm wrong about this, as a mouthpiece maker. Well, I feel like I know a lot about mouthpieces. I don't think I know as much as Brad. So, Brad, can you tell us, like, when you are looking at a mouthpiece, you're looking at conceiving of an idea of what a mouthpiece is going to be. What are the factors that go into general tone quality, resistance, all the things that we talk about and we want as a clarinet player?
Jay, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So mouthpieces, we all think of, you just put your reed on it, you blow into it, and you're making sound, and you move on and go from there. But it's actually really complex. I think it's probably one of the most complex parts of the instrument. And some of you may be aware of the baffle, the chamber, the bore. These are construction elements that help curate your playing experience. But there's more to it than that. There's the facing, and then there's the material from which the mouthpiece is made. And those two things have this sort of invisible sort of effect on the sound that takes you to the next level. It's the difference between, say, turning a phrase and turning a phrase you didn't even know you had in you. By that I mean you're hearing your sound while you're playing and you're reacting to it. You might be inspired. There's a sparkle in the tone that just says, I'm going to go left instead of right today. These sorts of things come from the lesser known elements of mouthpiece design. And they come from the well-known elements of mouthpiece design, all in combination.
Let's go over just for a second, like the basics that, when we read a chart, we learn about facing length and the openness of the facing. Those are, to me, that seems like the most basic part and kind of the entry-level part of what a player understands about a mouthpiece. So just, can you give us like the flyby version of how those things impact the playability of the mouthpiece?
So mouthpieces can be open or close. They can be short or long. And basically the open, not to be confused with an open playing experience,
right,
but open meaning the gap between the tip of the reed and the tip of the mouthpiece. The greater the opening, the more wind you can shovel through the instrument. We don't want to shovel, but you get the idea. The more
I'm happy to shovel. That's what's required of me. Yeah.
The more air we can put through the instrument. And so that gives us a louder loud, perhaps. It can give us a wider dynamic range. But the consequence, the cost might be, it's harder to control. It might be that it requires a little bit more mouth, a little more embouchure to hold the sound in place. Otherwise, it would go spread or wild sounding.
Right. That's what I've always felt, is that the more open the mouthpiece, the more work it takes for me to focus the mouthpiece, focus the sound. That's actually true?
Exactly.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Right.
And if the mouthpiece is close, it kind of focuses more automatically. It doesn't take as much work to put that proper in the mix. Proper, I use that word in my videos and things. But a negative byproduct of the closeness is you might not have as much range or freedom. So how do we get both?
Right.
How do we get the good elements of an open facing mixed with the good elements of a closed facing and eliminate the bad ones?
Right.
And so that's where the length can sort of kick in. A close mouthpiece that is a little bit shorter can give one the perception that it is more open than it measures. And a close mouthpiece that is longer might feel really like you need to have a harder reed. It might be requiring minimal embouchure to focus the sound. Some people really love that. Whereas an open mouthpiece with a short facing would become tight and brittle to the player, all things reed being equal.
Okay, I'm glad you're talking about this, because this leads into one of the questions that I've had for a long time. And I have a feeling I'm going to get a good answer. So resistance can come from a number of different places. I'm assuming it can come, like what you're talking about, from the opening, the length, and or something inside it.
Yes.
Which is magic. If I want to play what I want to play, the number 4 V12 reed, that's what I want to play. Let's say the resistance is coming from the tip opening, or it's coming from the length, or it's coming from something on the inside. What is the difference in my experience with that resistance?
Well, I'm not sure I fully understand your question, but I'll start talking.
Okay.
You direct.
No,
So resistance indeed can come from a variety of places,
Right.
and they all have a slightly different sonic effect. Like to the listener, when I'm playing a reed that's too resistant, it might sound like I'm working too hard. It might sound airy, or there could be some, extra inclusions in the tone that are undesirable. Whereas if the mouthpiece is resistant because the window is narrow, that's another way we can have resistance, is the distance between inside corners of the
right.
Of
So
the
if I'm right, the window is
yes,
this spot there.
Mhm.
That's I want to be.
the window is the opening, and if it's too narrow or narrower, it will add resistance, blowing resistance. But that's not going to necessarily add unwanted tonal inclusions, fuzz, or airiness. It's just going to add blowing. You got to really torque up that air to get the reed to vibrate the same.
Right.
And then resistance can come from like the chamber, the wind way, the insides being small. That's to a lesser degree, however. And then you can have resistance by the rails being wider. The wider rails dampen the reed's vibrations somewhat. Narrower rails add freedom for the reed to vibrate. Like I think of the analogy riding a bicycle with thin tires or a wide-tired bicycle. Thin-tired, it's very easy to pedal far and fast. And wide-tired bicycle takes a lot more energy to go slow and it's more tiring. But both of those bicycles, the mountain bike versus the Lance Arm racing bicycle, serve very specific purposes.
Right.
And so you could have your collection of mouthpieces. One might be the orchestra mouthpiece that needs to have efficiency of presence of sound that can project because you're in a hall and an acoustic that just doesn't favor the clarinet. Whereas you might want to do a recital and have something that can cushion and soften and give you safety, because the acoustics of the chamber environment paired with the repertoire that you're playing, you just want to have something that can tone you down a little bit. So there are a lot of ways to temper your resistance in a way that's healthy, and other ways that we do naturally, which can be mistaken. I think the big mistake is to play too much resistance from the reed. I personally like the resistance. By the way, some resistance is good, right? If it's too talking about close versus open, there's also free versus resistant. Well, we want something that's in the middle, not too free, not too resistant. If something's too free, it can become wild and spread and shallow sounding. If something is too resistant, it becomes tight and constrictive and can be even brittle or hard sounding.
Right.
If things become comfortable and organic to the player, to the amount of air that I naturally put through the instrument, and the amount of embouchure that I use in terms of pressures.
Right.
When those two things, wind and lip, interact with the reed, those three things, and the facing and the mouthpiece,
right.
When all of that stuff is working, it becomes organic, like natural. I want my playing experience to connect to my humanity. And when I work with a client, I want that mouthpiece that I'm making for them to connect with their approach, their unique individual approach. I think the world needs more unique individual clarinetists rather than the cookie cutter. We all want to sound the same.
Everybody is approaching, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, the instrument very, very differently, right? Because so like it does take a variety of things, for someone to be able to, get what they want. When we get a mouthpiece, like we know very, very little about it generally as players. I think it's fair to say.
When the civilian gets a mouthpiece,
so
you just want it to play. You want it to play.
Right. And like I don't care really like how it gets to be that point. I just know the experience that I'm having. And the word that I always use, and I'm not the only one, is cooperative resistance.
Yes.
Right. And so not everybody's going to find the same set of variables, and there's a lot of variables in it. It's weird when we talk about like the reed, how to get the reed balanced. Brad has his own reeds. They're here. You should know that. But like we get our reed working right, and getting that reed to work right is completely contingent on the mouthpiece that we're getting it to be right for. I mean, so then all of a sudden, the mouthpiece and the reed are like they're functioning together. They're separate things, but they can't really be separated totally. Right?
Yeah, it's like the clarinet is a double reed. It's just the only thing is we only use one reed, and the mouthpiece is the other reed.
Right,
sort of,
right. Yeah,
it's a unit. It's a setup.
Right. So one of the things that Brad does, that, as far as I know, I could be wrong, you make your own blanks.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Not only do I make my own blanks, but I make the rubber from which the blanks will then be made. So the rubber being, the idea is, was a long time ago, I wanted to create that same special resonance, the same special sound that was available, in the 1920s and the 1930s, but no longer available in the 1990s when I was setting out to do this project. And so I did that, and then I made a mouthpiece from it. And then a year or so in, things are going, well, hey, what if I made the chamber large and see how that changes the sound? I wasn't just one and done. I had all sorts of ideas, and I've been at it for a long time. So I've continued to explore and try things. And as one success comes along the way or something that fails, then I'll have another idea. And so now I have half a dozen different chambers that I can really create the specific mouthpiece for the specific individual. Like you're talking,
right.
No two people play with the same reed or the same embouchure or the same wind. And so now they have, if they're really interested, they can spend the time to figure out what is their perfect match. And I think I'm the only maker that really has that degree of choice. And, you just call me on the phone, we'll figure out, have a conversation. What are you looking for? What type of reeds do you play? Would you be willing to try something, maybe a little softer version of that or something? Because I think I've got that's sort of how the conversation goes. So what are they? I've got a small chamber, I've got a large chamber, and that's the space inside the beak portion of the
right.
mouthpiece. And then I've got mouthpieces that have some variations in the bore shapes. And I have some mouthpieces that have a different baffle contour. Most mouthpieces have a simple ski slope kind of a shape.
Can you define for us what a baffle is?
The baffle is the surface that is opposite the reed. So when the reed vibrates, there's a surface inside the mouthpiece which reflects that vibrant energy, the sound, the wind, the air, the energy. And how close the reflective surface is to the reed, or how far that reflective surface is to the reed, will greatly influence your playing experience. So a lot of times people say, a high baffle is a brighter sounding mouthpiece and a lower baffle is a darker sounding mouthpiece. And while that generally might be true, did you know that a deeper baffle mouthpiece will have more resistance than a higher baffled mouthpiece, for example? That's a lesser known truth. And a baffle that has an entrance angle as it relates to the table that is shallower might add more freedom, but it could add more brightness. That's basically saying the same thing that I said a moment ago. But that entrance angle can have a huge influence over the playing experience. So what I specifically have that's really unique is the S-curve baffle contour, which creates that important sparkling element, the effervescence partials, the high partials, but balance them out with a really deep contour in the back half of the baffle that creates freedom from the upper baffle being high, and brilliance from that upper baffle, and depth, richness, and warmth from the lower baffle. If it was just a big swoop, it would be kind of more empty and perhaps a little hollower by comparison. So that upper baffle is extremely important part of the whole mix.
Yeah, I've been doing this a long time. This is the first time I've had any insight into an upper baffle.
An upper baffle. Well, you play saxophone, right?
Yeah.
You've heard of like the Myers with the rollover baffle.
I've heard about it. I don't know what I never
so
knew what it meant.
Rollover, that is the upper baffle,
okay.
And that can cultivate not only that brilliance and the sparkle in the sound, but it can create what I think of as tonal grip. The stuff that allows you to, you can let go a little bit with the embouchure, not literally let go, but you can loosen up a little bit with the embouchure, and the baffle is allowing you to come away from the reed and still produce focus and ring and resonance.
Yeah, okay.
Here's something that well, Eddie Daniels, you know who Eddie Daniels,
Mm-hmm.
we all know Eddie Daniels.
Yeah.
Years ago, I was working with Mouthpieces with him, and he said something that I thought was absolutely brilliant. He said, I used to play big open mouthpieces. You know, I was playing tenor saxophone, and I thought the big open, I don't know who I'm imitating, but that doesn't sound like Eddie Daniels. But he said that the big open mouthpieces were something that he thought was going to be good for him. And he eventually kept on going closer and closer and closer. And now he's on a fairly medium close facing. 103 last I talked with him. And he said, I realized that, you know, there's always takes a little bit of embouchure pressure on the reed to get a proper focused sound. And if the baffle is far and the tip and the facing is farther from that reed, you just have to push that reed more with the lip.
Right.
And so rather than push and work with the lip, why not bring that facing closer to the lip and take that fight a notch back? And so I've cherished that as an argument against open face, you know, big open facings
Right.
that are hard to control. I don't know where I was going with that.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It was interesting. But okay, so case, I think I probably asked you this on the phone one day. The story I heard was that we can't have the same blanks that we used to have because when it was hot and it was being made, it was producing toxic fumes.
Carcinogens, I heard.
Yeah,
Right?
okay, so is there truth to this?
No.
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 That's no fun.
It's just really hard to make.
Okay.
And no one wants to make it. It
What?
takes days, weeks to cook this material.
Okay.
And we could go easy and cheap, or we can go the hard route. And there's probably good reasonings for both.
Sure.
For both things. And I've chosen to not ever allow the easy, cheap route be a guiding principle. I'm going to do what I believe in and let the chips fall where price is concerned.
Right.
Basically, a big important difference between the old rubber that I modeled mine from and the newer rubber is that, you know, they've added accelerants and stabilizers in the mix in the rubber formulation to help make it cook faster, essentially,
Okay.
and also to help keep it stable when it comes out of the mold. So you could make a molded mouthpiece, you could make a molded core, and it won't turn into a lima bean. It'll stay mouthpiece shaped. Right. And with my rubber, you simply can't mold a mouthpiece. I mold rawed rubber, which is a very crude beginning to what a mouthpiece is, and then I turn it down, pre-turn it, and then I put it in a lathe, cut it into the cone-shaped billets, turned parts that we would then mill into a finished mouthpiece. But that primary step of making hard rubber that will distort during the cool down process because we're not using stabilizers means that my rubber is not using the material, those additives that deaden the vibrancy.
Okay.
And that's just me saying, yes, those additives deaden the vibrancy. But I have a very strong conclusion about that.
Yeah, I know from talking to you as much as we have the past couple of months that your belief is strong because that impacts your life and the amount of time it takes you to make something and the investment of time and effort into producing these mouthpieces.
Yeah, I mean, each mouthpiece takes a lot of time and care and energy, and that's why I'm not the cheapest mouthpiece maker.
Right.
But they do, I think, I mean, it's hard for me because I'm so close in, but I do think that there's a brand identity. There's a personality to my mouthpieces. And I think it's the sum of the material and the construction and how I voice them, all of those things, which hopefully every brand, everything should have an identity.
Yeah. Well, let's get to playing some mouthpieces. What do we have here? Well, am I going to play from this here?
Sure.
This side,
Let's start. I usually like to go left to right.
Okay.
And this one is my new vintage collection, vintage mouthpiece. I actually started with a vintage collection, and now I just call it vintage. And this is my featuring my S-curve baffle contour, that one where it has the upper baffle for the nice ringing partials, the high partials to be still in the mix, and then a nice mellowing from the lower deepening of the baffle.
Okay, so one of the things that I noticed immediately is that this mouthpiece is actually bigger around.
Yeah.
Is that
It is true.
Is that a design?
It is.
There's, tell me about why.
By adding material, having some mass in the material in a very carefully positioned place can affect how it plays. For example, if you have the beak that is thicker or a beak that is thinner, that can create a darker or a brighter, quality to the sound. And by adding mass to my mouthpiece, my rubber is very lively, so I don't need to worry about trying to find ways to put ringing and pinging elements into the sound. What I do want to do is make sure that it's balanced. It's got not just ringing and pinging elements, but core and point and power and depth and warmth and color all in the mix. And so I've created the body form to help the way it vibrates.
And just in general, I'm curious to know, I guess I could have looked at it. How are these rails seem not unusually thin or unusually thick? Are they pretty much in the...
I think they're medium. However, I am very open to making thinner rails because that's the vintage ideal from which my inspiration is coming. And I can make wider railed mouthpieces. I'm a little hesitant to do it because I think deep down in my heart it's not quite what I'm interested in, but I know that people have a very strong opinion rails one way or another, and I know that my mouthpieces have lots of vibrancy, so even if I make the rails with a little bit more width, they're not going to lose the vibrancy. But a lot of people are used to the wide rails now. Most mouthpieces these days are made with much wider rails than they used to be.
I have always, the past 20 years, played on super thick rail mouthpieces, particularly the tip rail. That's just been a thing. Perception is that helps me keep the sound from spreading out crazy when I play louder. I feel like I can give a lot of gas to it without it going nuts.
Yeah.
And so, but I also feel like it's a lot of work to play on those mouthpieces. Like I feel like the reed is getting deadened quite a bit on the tip rail.
It'll darken, it'll deaden.
Right.
It will do all the things your logic is, I think, very sound. Ultimately, I like to think, though, that there's a better way, finding real efficiencies in how the mouthpiece, the facing and the rails interact so that you don't have to put it there. I want to say artificially, that might not be fair, but you can create safety from the facing too.
Right.
Maybe the facing is a little bit free, and you're nervous that you need safety control by dampening and darkening and resistifying.
Right.
But if you had vibrancy and rails that are super responsive, you can make the facing shorter and more resistant, and then you can decide how free or resistant you want to play by whatever reed strength you choose. Right. Now, the thing is interesting, really quick. You mentioned I want this mouthpiece to work on my 4.
Right.
And that's what most people want. They come to the table, they want to try mouthpieces. What do you have that works for my reed? And you would think it should be the other way around, really. Well, I've got a mouthpieces, find a reed for it, and that's not the way it works.
It's an oddity for me. I am unwilling to play anything other than a Vandoren V12 most of the time. I will check other things out.
Will you check a 3.5 plus or a 3? It's got to be a 4.
It's got to be I will play a 4, and I will find a mouthpiece that's suited to it that I feel comfortable on. And I always end up back in the same place with the reed.
Yeah.
I've varied off to other brands, other strengths, and I always end up home after 6 months.
Well, there's real truth in your experiential.
Yeah. So I'm going to play this. We're going to go from. Can you characterize? So like the first mouthpiece is going to be more open, less open, more resistant. What are we going on a progression here?
So these mouthpieces are all in the medium range,
okay,
because that's what you've been playing. Do you want me to get some?
No. Okay. I just want to make sure we
medium I classify as about a 105, 106 tip opening, 1.05 millimeters. And the lengths vary a little bit depending on the construction of the design.
Okay, so I'm playing a BD4 most of the time right now.
Okay, so the BD4 is more open.
And that's like a 112?
The BD5 would be like a 106. They vary.
Okay.
106, 109, and the BD4 is more open. And you know what? I don't.
You didn't make it, so you don't have to.
Yeah. I've seen a few, but I want to say it's like a 116.
It might be. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I made a video with the chart and everything. And
Well, okay. So Vandoren, they publish numbers that are more open than we mouthpiece guys measure, and that's because I think that it's probably that their point of reference is the extreme tip, rather than the inner tip rail.
Okay.
And so, especially with a wide tip rail mouthpiece, that differential could be 6 or 7 hundredths of a millimeter.
Okay.
So they'll say like on a BD5 it's a 119 and a half, and I'll measure all day long 112.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's try the next one. Tell me what's different about the next mouthpiece I'm going to play.
So the next one is the Epic mouthpiece, and this is the same core, the same chamber, the same shapings as my old Henri Chedeville mouthpiece.
Okay. And so there's no S-baffle, S-curve baffle in this?
Yeah, this one just has a very gentle slope and a slight A-frame tilt to the chamber.
The old A-frame tilt.
The A-frame tilt.
Now, is the facing dimensions the same?
Yeah, the facing dimensions are fairly similar. This one, the Epic that you're playing next is a little bit longer curve, but it's same tip opening.
All right.
Just slightly.
Yeah.
And do you feel a difference in resistance between the two? Blowing resistance?
Yeah. This one feels less alive to me.
Uh-huh.
A little bit. Is that what you would anticipate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit.
That doesn't necessarily, like, there's something about this that feels very, very comfortable to me. And like, I feel like I can push it. It's not going to get away from me.
There's definitely a safe feeling, I think, in that design. This particular design, I think, has a little bit more internal resistance than the previous one. But they sound fairly similar from where I'm seated. And this one is the Evoke.
Okay.
This one features an S-curve, but in a slightly different, slightly different degree, and the angle geometry in the internals is quite different than the first one, which was the vintage.
And again, the facing's essentially in the
Essentially the same, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's my favorite so far. Does that make sense based on what I'm already coming from?
Yes,
Okay.
I think so. This one, I think, typically has a little bit more dark, deeper bottom to it,
Mm-hmm.
and I hear a lot of nice things, legato and depth to it from where I'm seated. The response in the upper didn't quite speak the way you wanted to, but not sure if that's facing a reed, interacting,
Or being at the clarinet convention, not practicing. yeah, a lot of things.
Sure.
What do I have now?
That one is the Epic mouthpiece,
Okay.
where I've added the S curve to it. So the first one was the vintage with the S curve. Then we went to the Epic. Then we went to the Evoke, and now we're going back to the Epic, but we're sticking the S curve in.
Okay.
So we had a very gentle swoop. Now we've got a complex form.
Feels really nice to play. Feels also nice to play, but.
And then the last one is the same thing that you just played, but it's a little bit more open.
Okay. One of the things that I like about all these mouthpieces is that the articulation and the response is super immediate and super fast and super clean. Articulation is the thing I feel most concerned about. The quality of articulation I can get out of this is much, much cleaner than I can out of what I'm already playing on right now.
Well, the rails will definitely speak to that, and a lot of different little elements in combination again. But I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. I think that it's interesting. I'm delighted to hear you say it's that articulation is the thing that you really, because that's sort of the beginning of everything, isn't it?
Well,
and
literally,
yeah.
Yes.
I really love it when a client comes to the table and tries mouthpieces, and they're really getting into exploring articulation rather
Right.
than playing it safe and do everything slurred, because you can evaluate to such a more degree with what's going on.
Well, and the other thing that is interesting, I can't prove any of what I'm about to say, but that the I feel like this is giving me more higher overtones than I'm used to, and that is actually making the legato a little bit easier.
Interesting.
It's connecting in a way that's more simple than with when I've got the thicker tip rails and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. This is making me reevaluate all my life choices, Brad.
Well, I mean, if it's a little bit bright, it's different sound than you're used to, different facing than you're used to, the reed interfacing with it all. I really appreciate you giving these a go, and I think that ultimately all of that stuff comes in, and you can figure out most mouthpieces are quality if they work, right? And so you find the reed and you find the approach, and then when you go to a different mouthpiece, this is the hardest thing in the world to sell. I could stick a bell on the clarinet and it works or it doesn't. It's it's a binary choice. But with mouthpieces, there's so many complexities to it. I think you're hearing sound that's a little bit different, but you're feeling there's a response thing that's there that's compelling. So are you going to keep trying, or are you going to walk? And like you have to decide where did the advantages, where's the potential?
Here's $1 million question for you, and you can talk about this as a player and as somebody who has been on the other side of people trying mouthpieces. I wonder how much different the sound is than what I'm used to versus how much different my perception of the sound is because of all the feedback that I'm getting, right? Like, it probably doesn't really sound that much different than what I normally play on, but the experience that I'm having while doing it is quite a bit different, which is impacting my experience. And I'm also, as you know, we're hearing it from the backside. We're not hearing it from the front side.
Mm-hmm.
So we never really get to hear what we sound like anyway.
Yeah.
That's just like a super interesting thing to me to like evaluate with, I feel like, half the information, right? Like how much, and even when we record it and listen back, it's still not quite, like that to me is one of the frustrating parts about playing an instrument, is we never truly get to hear what we actually sound like. Yeah.
We sort of figure out how to, move forward with the information, but we don't really know.
You were talking, about how you might not be the least expensive mouthpiece maker. So I'm curious to know, what price points do you have for mouthpieces?
Right. In fact, I think, as far as I know, I'm the most expensive mouthpiece maker. Probably a lot of people, if you think about brand, I was talking about, I think of my brand as having responsive mouthpieces that have vitality and ring and in the sound that other mouthpieces might not have. But probably a lot of people, they don't think of that. They just think, oh, that's the guy that makes the really expensive mouthpieces. And while that might be true, we talked about the Overture mouthpiece, $40. It's a great student mouthpiece that a professional can use if they desired. It's a good mouthpiece. But I also have professionally hard rubber mouthpieces for the professional in the Prescott line. They're $200. Mm-hmm. And then I have the Sono line, which is around $450, depending on clarinet. Bass clarinet's a little bit more. So there's sort of like a good, better, and best.
Well, so what was I playing?
And the flagship lines are $900 to $1,100, depending on how the internal configurations come together. Yeah. And the barrels are between $450 and $600.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of handwork involved,
right?
And the quality of my handwork and the presentation, these are all things that are really important to me.
Right.
And so ultimately, when I look at the whole picture, you can find a really good mouthpiece for not a lot of money from Behn.
Brad, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Jay, it's been mine.
No, listen, you've changed my life with these recases, and that was a nice entry point into this. I appreciate your time. This has been a really eye-opening conversation for me.
Likewise, your enthusiasm and excitement to the clarinet, it's intoxicating.
And your recases make a very adequate microphone holder.
That's right, a little janky. Janky. But
I call it MacGyvery. But
MacGyvery, yes, right. What does the word janky actually mean?
I don't know. This.
Yes.
Yeah, just in case I leave this in the video, this is
3 reed cases. This one's the bass clarinet.
3 reed cases with a cup with a hole in the bottom. Yeah. So we did it. Thanks,
well
Brad.
done. Yeah.
All right.